We all have those special fictional stories that hit us just right at a specific point in our lives. One that made so much of an impact it is impossible to forget and may have inspired or enhanced our lives in a particular way. I think the media that you consume around your formative years, probably between the ages of 12 to 18, have the most important influence on you and the way that you view yourself and the world around you. For me, one of those specific examples was none other than Rurouni Kenshin. Rurouni Kenshin is a shonen manga that came out during the 90s but made its way to the West during the early 2000s. On its surface, an action battle samurai series, but is actually a story that carries heavy themes of regret, redemption, war, and trying to live your life in a positive way after making an astounding amount of mistakes. To have everyone look at you one way when you feel the complete opposite on the inside, and even with a sense of hope throughout, it still drops brutal truths about life, like what it means to be strong or weak, and the benefits and detriments of both. I first discovered Rurouni Kenshin through the anime, and followed it through to the end of its third season, only to find out later on that season 3 was actually all filler, which explains why most of it was garbage, and that the manga continues on and tells the final story arc that was not featured in the anime at all, and an extremely important one for that of Kenshin himself and uncovering his history. But even when picking up the manga for the first time, there are so many moments in the manga as opposed to in the anime that are much darker, more violent, and add even more resonance to certain scenes. So this review is primarily focused on the manga. I may do an anime review at some point as well. I also think it would help people figure out the anime canon. But when it comes to the manga, it's all pretty straightforward. And I'm only talking about the original 28-volume series. I'm not including any of the newer material because, well, I just have not read it yet. So what is Rurouni Kenshin? It's funny because sometimes explaining the plot makes it seem a lot more complicated than it actually is, because Japanese history is kind of a very important element of the series, but it's explained to the reader in very basic terms and gives you all of the context that you need to know along the way. Basically, the manga begins about 10 years into what is known as the Meiji era. This was meant to be a time of new peace and prosperity to Japan, restoring the emperor to the throne and ending years of battles and bloodsheds on the streets. Our protagonist Kenshin was a key figure within the war that led to this new era. He acted as a hitokiri, an assassin, and he carried out important assassinations that led to the Meiji era being created. However, 10 years on, Kenshin is an older man, about 28 years old, and wanders Japan alone, listening to no general or master, and carrying a reverse-bladed sword, specifically in an attempt to never kill again, and if he must do battle, his sword will theoretically not be able to kill his opponent. Now obviously you have to take a little bit of a suspense of disbelief, since if you strike someone as hard as Kenshin hits with a blunt object, you could still probably kill them, but for story purposes, we just assume Kenshin knows what he's doing. But right off the bat, we have this mystery of why does Kenshin no longer kill, why did he decide to be a wanderer, also known as a Rurouni, instead of becoming some sort of key figure in the military like he most certainly could have, and what does Kenshin seek to accomplish during his travels? However, bringing about the Meiji era may seem like a good thing, but Japan is still very much in a bit of a mess. Many people are still untrusting of the new ways of government, how Japan is opening its borders to other nations, and how tradition seems to be slipping away from them. There are those who wish to bring back the war and chaos of the past, those who wish to bring down what they consider to be a corrupt new government, and those that still remember the deeds of Kenshin's past, back when Kenshin was known as Batosai, the Manslayer, and they wish to seek vengeance either on Kenshin himself or anybody that he holds dear, another reason why Kenshin keeps himself very much at a distance from other people. Kenshin himself is a character who, like in my introduction, really helped shape me into who I am today. He also differs a lot from other shonen protagonists, one of the main reasons being his age in history. Often we see shonen series starting with a young protagonist who trains, grows stronger, and builds himself up over time, persevering against each battle and obstacle that he faces. But the story begins with Kenshin already as an adult, already a master swordsman, and with his most brutal days already behind him. He is tormented by memories of the past, and plagued to do battle with just about anybody that wants a piece of him. He's a somber character who puts on a front of a big clueless doof, but hides his inner darkness away from the people around him, away from his friends that would worry, and away from his enemies that would see into his emotions. Kenshin seeks to make amends for his past, the reasons of which are steadily given throughout the course of the manga, which I don't want to spoil in this video, and there are also arcs and themes within Kenshin's character that relate steadily to the idea of life and death, in that, is it better to die for one's ideals, or remain living for the future? When is it time to be okay with death, and when should you not accept that as a possibility? And when it comes to truly facing the demons of your past, what answers can you find that are not violence? And if violence is the only course, then can you remain within this new persona that you've built for yourself? Or will you regress back into being the Hitokiri? Is a murderer only that, until the day that he dies? Also, unlike a lot of shonen, the only power system you have in Rurouni Kenshin is swordsmanship. Now, obviously, things are incredibly exaggerated, and most of the characters constantly defy the laws of physics, but what I do like about it is that for the most part, it is grounded in the restrictions of martial arts and swordsmanship. The characters don't have a loophole to get them through situations other than their own skills. The battles are often decided within a split second, and the characters do get wounded, and those wounds, or constant strain on their bodies, does continue to affect them for many battles to come. Rurouni Kenshin is also filled to the brim with incredible characters, not just Kenshin himself, but many others, and most of which never have a clear defined line of good and evil. The characters are complex, fighting for their own personal beliefs and ideologies, and reacting in a way that their own personal history or trauma have made them to be. Here's just a bit of a brief overview. You have Kaoru Kamiya, a young girl who after the death of her father became the inheritor of a swordsmanship school that practices with only wooden swords and has renounced the idea of killing. Kaoru often serves as the supportive moral center of the story and has the strongest relationship with Kenshin than any other character. She's no slouch when it comes to fighting, but we see how incredibly difficult it is for her to have this responsibility, to try to live up to her father's name, and to embrace her feminine side, which often needs to be pushed to the background for survival. Yahiko Myojin, who I think is a perfect example of how to incorporate a child character into the main group. The child of a fallen samurai, a pickpocket turned student of Kaoru, Yahiko begins the series as a snarky brat and is often used for just comic relief. However, as the story moves forward, Yahiko really does become fully utilized as a character. He develops his own strength, he matures, and one of the most important characters by the end of the story. Sanosuke Sagara, a man directly affected by the Meiji government and with a vendetta against them. A man who threw himself into fighting and violence, and only through his connection with Kenshin does he start to see things on an individual level, and remains pure-intentioned, but cannot get rid of the symbol for evil that he wears on his back, a reminder of where he came from and what he allowed himself to be for so long. Hajime Saito, and honestly, Saito might be my favorite character. We get more out of Kenshin, and so he's closer to my heart, but I admire Saito so much in that he was a man directly opposed to Kenshin's side during the war, and he's the first character that we see who is equal to Kenshin in skill. But just because they were on opposite ends of the war doesn't make one or the other right or wrong. Saito believes in one thing only, Akusoku San, which means slay evil immediately. Anything or anyone that he deems to be evil, he will kill. He is what you call chaotic good, kind of like the Punisher, but with a sword. And unlike Kenshin, he has no regrets about his past actions, a man so honed and with conviction to a philosophy that he will never disregard. Aoshi Shinomori, the chosen leader of a group of ninjas called the Oniwanbashu. Aoshi lives for the lives and reputation of his fellow members, but when that is broken from him for reasons I will not spoil, Aoshi takes a deep turn into selfish darkness and has one of the best character plummets and rises that the manga has to offer. Anyway, I could go on and on about various characters and why I think they're great, but let me give you a brief overview of the arcs, a little more input, a few negatives, and then I'll finish up my review so that you have a chance to go check out Rurouni Kenshin yourself. The series can basically be broken down into three major arcs: the Wandering Swordsman Arc, the Kyoto Arc, and the Jinshu Arc. The Wandering Swordsman Arc does most of all the introductions of the characters, sets up the premise and mystery beyond Kenshin, and has about 4 mini-stories within it. One involving an assassin named Jinei, who, though his run is very short-lived, carries a heavy impact throughout the story. and gives us a clue into the potential of Kenshin's personality when it comes to fighting to protect, and what do you do when there is no other alternative than to kill. The second arc of Rurouni Kenshin is what I think pushes it into greatness. I am talking about the Kyoto Arc. To me, this is a 10 out of 10 manga arc and my top favorite shonen arc of all time. I think everything done in this arc is fantastic, from the prelude and setup of Kenshin vs. Saito, to having your main cast disband and go their separate ways, each taking their own journey to Kyoto, a city that was once a major battleground for Batosai the Manslayer, and introducing one of my favorite antagonists of all time, Makoto Shishio. He has an iconic look, being wrapped up in bandages like a mummy. Shishio embodies everything that Kenshin is not, and like Saito, Shishio lives by a conviction of his own way of life, this being, if you are strong you live, if you are weak you die, and that the weak have no business being in a place of power. Shishio was an assassin like Kenshin, but because he knew too much, when he was no longer needed, instead of being discharged, he was shot and set on fire in an attempt to kill him. But he managed to survive, and now he vows to take down the Meiji government, not for revenge, but because they are weak and cowards who won't rise to the challenges themselves, but send out the strong to do it in their place. There's a lot of interesting themes and ideas when it comes to who Shishio is, and how he instills these vows upon another character, like a boy named Sojiro. Because as great as it is that Kenshin is a savior and hero to many people, some others are not so lucky. And what happens when there is no one there to save you? You either have to become strong, or you will die weak. The themes of strength and weakness are covered in the Kyoto Arc, along with the value of holding on and striving for a better future despite mistakes of the past. Every character gets their moment to shine, has an epic battle that is important for them, and again toes that line between what is good and evil within a person. The final arc, the Jinshu arc, and the one that's not featured in the original anime series, is also an incredible arc, but a bit of a mixed bag depending on what you're looking for. Because Jinshu, a term that basically means, if God in heaven won't enact justice on you, then I will do it myself, is an arc all about Kenshin and his past. This arc specifically focuses on Kenshin himself, and what actually happened to turn him from an assassin into a wanderer that doesn't kill, and how the sins of the past and those mistakes come back to enact vengeance on him, with a villain named Enishi whose only goal is to make Kenshin suffer. Not kill Kenshin, not defeat him in battle, but to break him mentally and have him experience the pain and loss that he had given so many others during the warring times of Japan. There's about a 2-volume long backstory featured within this arc that is beautifully written and gives meaning to Kenshin's vow and his cross-shaped scar that he carries on his left cheek. A backstory that was actually adapted into its own OVA called Samurai X Trust and Betrayal, but the full, complete Jinshu arc has never got its justice in the anime form at least. So yes, ultimately Rurouni Kenshin is a redemption story, but it's one that takes place in a world that is one big gray area because it's based on the real world, which is nothing but shades of gray. Without knowing a person's life story, their trauma, their strengths, weaknesses, and how the decisions that they made coincide with decisions that others have made that make up the result of whatever actions had take place, Kenshin attempts to protect the peace around him while battling deep within his own inner turmoil between the things that he's done and the man that he wants to be. And the manga allows you to see these multiple perspectives, not just Kenshin's, and lets you draw your own conclusions about the events at hand. I think the benefit of Kenshin is that you can really understand where everyone is coming from, and despite having a seemingly complicated premise, a lot of it dealing with Japanese history, the government, I promise it doesn't bog down the story with political jargon all the time. Everything is explained well between the course of the plotline and through the characters, and so it doesn't become that overwhelming. And hey, you're going to learn something while reading too, so there you go. Now, if I have any negatives to say about Rurouni Kenshin, my main one is, well, the fact that at the end of the day, it is still a shonen series. And look, I love shonen, but since Kenshin does at large cover darker, heavier themes, there are times where they will continue to move forward for the sake of having another battle or fight instead of focusing on the themes a little bit harder. And hey, the fights are drawn amazingly, great paneling, and the way that the impact and the blood is drawn in the manga, I truly think really benefits the series and adds to it. But for the sake of consistency and having Rurouni Kenshin be a battle manga, there are definitely moments where you can predict the setup and the pairings of the characters, and you know that, yep, yeah, there's going to be a fight between those two. And sometimes these psychological aspects get pushed to the background or become very surface level in the service of having those fights. There's also a lot of moments of humor interrupting serious moments at times, and it kind of feels like it was almost as if it was a requirement every chapter to have at least one silly moment, probably to stop the series from getting too dark as a shonen and with topics as heavy as the ones that it covers. I don't know, maybe it makes sense somewhere, but it can be a little distracting at times. Also remember that Kenshin is an older series now, released in the 90s in Japan. I saw the anime and read the manga when I was a teenager in the early to mid 2000s, and a lot of anime and manga have come out since then, so sometimes I don't know if the older series like this is something that would still resonate with people. Taking place so far into the past, it kind of exists within its own pocket of time, and the themes are universal enough that there isn't really anything that contradicts its points and themes this far out. Rurouni Kenshin is my second favorite manga behind Berserk, and trust me, I had a very difficult battle inside my head when I was discovering that I liked Berserk better. It was rough, you guys. And people often ask me, why do you put Kenshin above Vagabond? That doesn't make sense. And when I rank my personal favorites, that's just the thing. It's personal. Vagabond is far and away a better manga than Kenshin in just about every aspect, don't get me wrong. But Kenshin resides within my heart and was extremely important to me growing up. Watching Kenshin's struggle and confliction inspired and motivated me. I spent a lot of time with these characters in both the anime and manga form, and I just love hanging out with them. Like, I love Vagabond too, but I would want to sit around and share a beef pot at the Akabeko with Kenshin, Kaoru, Sanosuke, and Yahiko. Like, that's where I would want to be. It sounds stupid, but these characters felt like a family to me. I didn't really have a lot of role models in real life to look up to while I was growing up, but I looked up to Kenshin. I respected him despite him being a fictional character, and Kenshin taught me a lot of things, not the least of which is that I'm worth more to the world alive, trying to do better than dying in regrets of my past. So do yourself a favor and read Rurouni Kenshin. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I really truly do appreciate it. This is a review I've wanted to make for a long time, but I wanted to make sure I finished rereading the manga before I did it. It's been about 10 years since the last time I read it, so I was very grateful to experience it once again and live out the lives of these characters once more. If you have read Kenshin, please leave all your thoughts and opinions down below, or even if you've just seen the anime. If you haven't seen it or read it, I would highly recommend that you do, and I definitely recommend the manga over the anime for sure. Other than that, guys, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more manga, anime, or whatever content and reviews. Also, check out the description for my merch store, Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and all that other fun stuff. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next time.